Welcome back to Absurdity, where we discuss all things absurd in religion, culture, and society. And today I am joined by my tall, dark, and handsome co-host, Henry Johnson, who is only 2 out of 3 of those things.
Thank you, Ryan. I was just preparing a comeback, and I wasn't sure how to handle that, but looking at your screen, I'll just say scratch that.
Nice. Well done. My shirt says scratch the surface. Well done. Good job.
Yes, but the way you're sitting, it just says the scratch at the top until you lean back, and then I get the.
Have you ever seen those, like, pick 2? You can have it, I think, like freelancers use those, where it's like, for clients, you can either have it done quick, done cheap, or
done right.
I think it's done right is the third one. That's what I thought for tall, dark, and handsome for you. Pick 2. Those are the only 2 you guess. And if you've never seen Henry, because you are unaware that I now publish these on my YouTube channel, so you can actually watch Absurdity now completely from start to finish. There's no paywall for it. There is just full-on YouTube release for this show on my YouTube channel, which you can check in the description, the episode description for this. Also, Henry, I found out a really cool app this week for listening to podcasts that you, of all people, I think would really appreciate. It's called Air, AIRR, and it is meant to basically take notes for podcasts, where you can highlight. Imagine being able to highlight your podcast. So as you're listening to a show that you like, you can just like literally tap or hold down a quote button on the screen, and it will just grab that audio snippet, and you can share that to people. You can like just share a specific segment of a show. You can take notes. You can have the app transcribe that certain section of it too. It's actually, I just discovered it this week thanks to a YouTube video from, I think his name is Ali Abdal. He's like a doctor turned YouTuber who's does a ton of like productivity, lifelong learning style videos. They're all really good, but I learned it from him. It's a really cool app that I've started to check out. And I figure if anyone out there wants a new podcast app to use, or Henry, if you want one, you may enjoy that.
All righty. That's new. They're not a sponsor, by the way.
No, no. All the sponsors already played. We're good. Which, if you're listening to this after, I think I had to extend our contract with Southwestern for a month because of an issue that took place in December, where the ad didn't play.
Did
so
you
after,
know there's an Adventist university in Texas? Yes,
that's right.
Texas. Oh, sorry.
So once July is out, there won't be any more ads on this show, which is cool. We're just running it straight through, and that's gonna be that. So, but yeah. With that, today is not going to be
running something else straight through. I mean,
yeah. Today is not going to be a fun day. So I'm just going to open with a trigger warning right now, because if you are unaware of Josh Duggar, or unaware of...
I'm sorry, I just threw up my mouth a little bit.
Yep. If you're unaware of any of what's happened, just know that today's episode involves sexual assault. It involves sexual assault of minors. It involves child pornography. It involves quite a number of things related to
spiritual abuse.
Spiritual abuse,
spousal abuse,
through spousal abuse through male headship theology, and through basically submissive theology or submission theology.
White privilege in the justice system.
That's right. There's quite a bit of things going on here that are worth talking about. But unfortunately, that does mean that if you're someone who has personally experienced any of this, or still has some emotional ties to it that are quite difficult, I just want to give you a heads up ahead of time that we are going to be talking about this. It's important to talk about, and I think there are some real lessons to draw from this for if you're involved in the church, if you're in any position of influence in your own local church, community, friend group, whatever, and you're a Christian, then there are things that we can be doing individually and communally in order to kind of stop the harmful theology that has brought this stuff about, or that has at least aided in bringing this stuff about.
It's aided and abetted, but
yep.
even though most people might not view it that way, good theology or bad theology always leads to good or bad activity. What you believe always expresses itself. This is independent of even religious thought. What you believe will express itself. If I believe in gravity, I'm probably not throwing myself off of a bridge just for fun to see if I float, right? So what you believe, you usually act on, and that's kind of the concept we're going on here.
Yep. So for background on Josh Duggar, and I had to actually look some of this up again because it's been enough time has passed since I've interacted with it. And even when it first broke, I didn't interact with it heavily.
And this is the second
several
time
years
an issue
ago.
has
This
come
is
up
correct.
with this individual. Yes.
Correct. So I did some background on him, and I actually had to take a break and walk away. So, yeah, this one is rough. But
thanks for giving a media platform to this guy, TLC. Not.
To be fair, I don't think they knew at the time that this happened. But I could be wrong. The first piece. Obviously, TLC hasn't done anything with them since.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they have they released a new show with him? I don't think they had.
No, I don't think they released a new show, but if I'm not mistaken, he was able to reappear on the one they were continuing, at least in certain episodes. But
yes,
I say that only as a background. My wife, for whatever reason, I mean, every perfect person has to have a flaw, and my wife says she watches TLC shows as if reality television is worth anything. And so I know of the show he was on. And that's the only way I know of it is because my wife sometimes has watched it, and I've walked through and like, what are you watching? But anyway.
Henry, it's okay to say that you like trash reality television. It's completely okay to do that.
Well, if HGTV counts as trash reality television, it just involves houses instead of people, then yes, I do sometimes like
HGTV is like the new medical office waiting, like lobby TV channel now. That's what HGTV is.
You say that, but that's hilarious you say that because I was in an endodontist office for an appointment and HGTV was on in the waiting area.
I know. My dentist does it.
Yes.
My primary care facility does it. I mean,
it's
all
probably
because
they think it's the only thing safe for kids, adults, and everything. Just it's just mindless. Look, how bad can it be tearing out a wall in a house versus
correct. Versus Discovery Channel, History Channel, any of those.
Yeah, because History Channel is not history. It's zombies, pirates, and zombie Nazis or zombie pirates, right? Whichever you want.
I was going to say, you're describing the plot of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. We've gotten way off track. So,
sorry, that's our minds trying to protect themselves.
Correct.
From
because we don't want to do this.
Okay, I'll be quiet. Ryan, give us the
No, it's
speaking
okay.
of Vampire Hunter, give us the gory details about the man that should have an axe in his head. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I just give away what I thought about this? Give us the background.
So Josh Duggar is a part of the Duggar family, which had a show back in, I think 2008 is when it first released on TLC called 19 and Counting, about a family, the Duggar family, with an ever-growing number of kids. And it was that's how the Duggar family first came to fame, including Josh. Well, on May 21st in 2015, a report by the magazine In Touch Weekly stated that Jim Bob Duggar, who I believe
that's a really bad magazine title for this topic.
I agree. The Jim Bob Duggar, I believe is his dad, had told the Arkansas State Police that Josh Duggar molested 5 underage girls between 2002 and 2003 when he was 14 and 15 years old. The magazine's source of information was a redacted police report obtained via the Freedom of Information Act. And the police report indicated that 4 of the 5 molestation victims were Duggar's siblings. Jim Bob Duggar reported that he learned in March 2002 that Josh had touched the breasts and genital region of his sisters on multiple occasions while they were sleeping. I now feel the need to go rinse my mouth out after reading that statement.
Yeah, that was oof.
And I saw a comment. I'll come down to it a little bit later, but I saw a comment that someone said that this whole story has been kind of like a Russian nesting dolls of bad.
Surprise! Look what's under here. Surprise!
Yep, exactly. In March 2003, Duggar's parents learned of additional incidents and victims, including the touching of a babysitter, reaching under the dress of a younger sister who was in his lap, and cornering a sister in the laundry room to reach under her clothing. The Duggars had also been told the abuse included a much younger sister who, according to them, didn't understand she had been improperly touched And the magazine reported in June of 2015 that another police report they'd obtained said Josh had confessed to his father on 3 separate occasions to committing molestation. He'd admitted it involved a much younger sister. I don't know why I keep saying that. Sister, and 7 incidents. The article also noted that the family waited at least 16 months before reporting the abuse to authorities. Now, most of that, just so we're clear, I do cite sources, does come from Wikipedia. However, almost every single one of those sentences has like 10 different annotations next to it. So all of those are cited. So that's the first thing that broke. That's
what got him removed from the show.
Then I believe it was in 2015, as a part of this was when the Ashley Madison data leak or data breach happened, and Josh was revealed to have made about $1,000 worth of payments over a 2-year period during the time that all of this was coming out. And it was that's when he confessed to a pornography addiction and being unfaithful to his wife and being a massive hypocrite. And around this time is when a retired porn star was basically had filed charges against Josh and was for alleged rape. And she, as an individual, didn't have the resources to go after Josh, who was rich from, years of being on a television show with his family. And she didn't have the money to pursue it. So when Josh's lawyers pulled out receipts, and you can look up the details of the alleged. I'm not going to go into that one. That one's more graphic. But basically, Josh's lawyers produced records of Uber receipts from a different city at the alleged time or the alleged date of the rape, and she didn't have the resources. Her claim is she doesn't have the resources to go up against a continual thing of trying to battle this. And so she ended up dropping it. And that happens quite a lot in the system. So it's hard to say, it is an alleged at this point. However, given what has now turned up about Josh in this most recent one, I am much more inclined to believe this or believe that.
If
and one
the
of the
shoe fits.
Right? And one of the grossest things to me was at one point, Josh's dad took him to meet with an Arkansas state trooper named, last name was Hutchins, and to confess about it and talk about it. Hutchins claimed that he only knew of one incident, that Josh hadn't told him any more or confessed to any more. And Hutchins apparently gave him a very stern talking to. Josh has been in therapy or rehabilitation clinics several times. But then get this, Hutchins himself, the state trooper, was later arrested and convicted on child pornography charges. That's the Russian nesting doll.
Or it's Arkansas.
Just kidding. If you're from Arkansas, we love you, especially if you're from Bentonville, because that's like mountain biking capital right now. It's actually really cool.
And
I really want to go.
The headquarters of what most Americans worship every day to get all of our stuff.
Oh, Amazon?
Walmart.
Okay, I was like, what? Amazon is not in Arkansas. That's why I was confused. Because during the pandemic, it wasn't Walmart, friend. It was.
No, that's
Amazon.
True. But they're lazy folk that still want it now, and that's going to be Walmart.
All right, so let's get into the current news, which is on April 29, U.S. Marshals arrested Duggar. This is this year. This is literally, a week ago? On April 29, 2021, U.S. Marshals arrested Duggar on federal charges of possession of child pornography, and they allege that he obtained the images in 2019. The federal grand jury's indictment accuses Duggar of having knowingly received pornographic images of children who were under 12 years old. On April 30, he pleaded not guilty to 1 count each of charges of receiving and possessing child pornography, indicating that he would fight back in the courtroom against the charges. At the time that this all happened, Duggar's 6 children were under the age of 11, and his wife Anna was pregnant with a 7th child. As part of the conditions for his bail, yes, Duggar made bail. He actually has a conditional bail. But he did make bail.
Wait, it gets better. You're going to talk about the conditions of the bail?
Yeah, the conditions of the bail are he must wear an ankle monitor. He is permitted to have as much contact with his children as he wants, as long as his wife is present. He has to have a probation officer's permission to leave the third-party custodian's home. In other words, he's staying with actually, I think, a pastor and family friends.
He's staying with someone that his dad found for him.
Yes.
Who, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, that individual he's staying with, that wife did not want him there.
No one wants him there. No one wants him out. He can't access the internet, and he cannot be inside a residence where firearms are stored. So, all of this to say, if you're curious about just how gross this is, the videos themselves contained, or the images and videos that he had contained videos on completely grown fathers basically abusing toddlers, babies, infants, sexually abusing them.
Didn't
and
the
otherwise.
lead investigator say this was some of the most horrible stuff he's ever had to weed
through? Yep.
Yeah.
The top 5 worst things that they've seen. In fact, one of the most notorious child pornography criminals or convicts, Scully, I think is his last name. Is it Ted Scully? I'm trying to remember his name. But there's claims out there, and I haven't been able to verify them yet, that some of the videos that he has, that he made, actually were on Josh's computer. And this dude has kids that are within the age range of the videos he was watching, on top of videos of wives and full adult women also being raped. So it was both child pornography and just straight up sexual assault videos, and it's of adults, and it's so gross and disgusting. And once again, I feel the need to wash out my mouth. And if you could listen to all of that, I salute you, because it was really hard for me to read, to be honest. And now we actually have to dissect some of this.
Yeah, and as a side note, if you're watching this on the YouTube, you might notice Ryan and I both either smirking or laughing or whatever, and it's not at the material. I don't want it to come off as glib, like we're sitting here like,
no, it's out of disbelief and horror.
Yeah, it's kind of like, have you ever been in those situations where it's so bad it's awkward and you're just desperate, your body's trying to figure out, how do I respond to this, or what should I do? So like, even me throwing in a few puns every now and then, it's like, try and act normal. This is
so every first date I've ever been on. Okay, great.
Oh, mercy. Yeah,
you agreed with that before I finished.
Listen, my point being, having been on a first date with Ryan. No, so the point is, yeah, and even this little diversion here before we get into it, this is just really difficult stuff, which is, again, why the trigger warning. And we don't mean to make light of it at all. This is us wrestling with material that no human being should have to wrestle with. And I know that's us not having experienced or been the recipient of any of this. So again, to any of our listeners who have unfortunately been the recipient of things like this, of any kind of abuse, of any kind of, revenge porn, image shaming, whatever kind of things, even some of the spiritual abuse and headship theology we're going to be talking about that intersects with this. Again, we're not trying to make light of it, and we don't want to, in our attempts to wrestle with it, further violate you or maximize your pain. That's not our intent. So I just wanted to explain that if you're watching or listening and part of you is like, man, it kind of seems like they're making light of it. We're not. Unfortunately, we don't have a framework with which to relate to this. I mean, that's good that we don't have a framework, but I'm saying we're just struggling to churn through this. So that's why it's going to be kind of weird, even though the topic is just beyond diabolically weird. It doesn't even deserve the moniker of weird. It's just gross.
No, but this is an important part of moving forward from this stuff is and I don't mean this from the victimization standpoint. I mean this from a kind of church and society standpoint. The only way we actually get through this stuff is by addressing it, not sweeping it under the rug. That's why we have trigger warnings at the beginning, so that those who are sensitive to it can turn away if they need to, and or take breaks or whatever, so that they're not caught off guard. But we do want to make sure that we're having the conversations that we need to have, because at the end of the day, Josh and his family do claim to be people of faith, and there's a very specific theology that we've already mentioned, before I gave the background for all of this, that plays into this pretty heavily, and is something that is and I think both of our opinions pretty gross. So anyway, I think I hate to have this conversation, but I'm glad that things have progressed to a point that this doesn't just get swept under the rug entirely. And I'm glad that social media
almost like
exists.
it did the last time.
Correct. And I'm glad social media exists as a way to make sure that it stays in the spotlight. We saw that with George Floyd, and now we see that with people like Duggar. We see this with Andrew Brown in North Carolina.
And it's something that's true for all the times. None of us like conflict, but this should be another further proof for people of faith and anybody. If you do not deal with something when you first discover it, it will manifest itself again, and probably in worse fashion. This always happens. You go, well, they've been caught now, and so if we give them grace, then this will never happen again. Well, this is one thing if they're taking the cookie out the cookie jar. It's another thing with use your mind. But every time people are like, well, they've learned, or let's just drop it. It never drops. It comes back and, like a dodgeball game gone wrong, whacks you in the face horribly.
Every time. And it's so anyway, let's kind of dive into this a little bit more. So Henry, I guess initial thoughts on all of this, and reactions when you heard about this, and how you've kind of processed it since.
Vomit.
Just straight vomit for weeks. One continuous stream. It just stopped before we recorded.
Yes, totally like. But not that I need to give this imagery to people, but totally like the Family Guy episode where Stewie had ingested, the whole family had tried to ingest vomit-inducing drugs to fight over who could get the last piece of pie in the fridge. It was just not good. No, I mean, I didn't literally throw up, but I definitely did not feel good about this. I remember my first reaction was thinking my wife watches things dealing with this family, maybe not Josh specifically, but the wider family. And I was so tempted to go in and forbid my wife from watching anything with their name in it.
Yeah.
But that's not my right to do, So
well, and that's actually a very, very important point in all of this.
That's another,
it
it isn't. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if we want to get fair, there's lots of things we could all say that I just referenced Family Guy. That's not the best show either. So, sorry to all my cartoon lovers, but my point is,
hey, that's me. I can quote almost all of Family Guy front to back.
Oh, what the deuce! Oh, it's finally happened. I've taken over absurdity. Okay, anyway. So now that you just got that bit of knowledge, again, that's deflecting. But yeah, my whole point is it took me a second, actually, when I first heard the news again. They mentioned this name, and because I don't necessarily watch the show, I was like, that sounds familiar, but I don't know why it's familiar. And then it was kind of like I ignored it at first, and then in a downtime waiting in a line, I start going through the news app again, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll click on this. And then they're explaining that whole family. I was like, oh, yeah, the show that my wife has on the app. And that was about my gist of interaction with it. I can't say I've ever even watched a full episode of that when he was on it, or even since through. Yeah. So it's not that personal in that sense, but just reading the quotes from the guy saying what the pornography was, and this is an FBI agent that deals with this kind of stuff. And he's like, this is like top 5 worst I've ever seen. And then realizing, looking into the topic a bit more than I had, because honestly, if it was ever on my radar, it definitely fell off. And then reading about what he was doing to his own family, the thought that crossed my mind again was, what makes you think, to the judge or whoever just let him out on bail, what makes you think he wouldn't do it to his own kids if he did it to his siblings? The whole thing was just like one big giant red flag. As a pastor, if I had anybody that was even remotely close to any of this, and I found out in my church, they're out.
Yep.
Okay, that they ain't staying around. I don't care if they're on bail or whatever. I'll be like, you know what, you're gone. You're out, and everyone deserves ministry, but you deserve ministry away from any people in this congregation right now.
Correct. There is grace, and there is forgiveness that comes, but that doesn't exclude you or prevent consequences for your actions and safeguards to protect
doing
other
things
people.
And to protect you before people
Correct.
are like, oh, you're
and
picking on this person. If you've got an issue with children,
yep,
right? Why would someone who loves you willingly put you back around children? Right? Because nobody's willpower is absolute.
To some degree. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm just saying as a leader, and maybe this is going out on a limb here, because it's interesting that this topic hit, and it's very interesting. I want to be very careful how I phrase this. I've ended up having to minister to an individual in the last year of my ministry who took a lot of courage. They finally came to me and admitted that they had served time in jail over child pornography issues. And they were notifying me of this because both it's the law, because they get put on a sex offender registry, and they were interested in the church, and they wanted to notify me. But here's the couple thing that was interesting to me about that. This individual confessed it to me without me having to find it out and then be like, hey, look what I just discovered. So they went out of their way to tell me, which I know is legal, but it doesn't mean people do it. That's the law. I did it. The second thing is they admitted it to me. Third, they were almost in tears and contrite about it. And four, readily said, I want to stay away from kids. I don't want to be anywhere near them. I want you to know I'm perfectly willing for whatever restrictions you place on me to stay away. And also they went, if this makes you uncomfortable, I will never set foot in that church again. Like they were to that level of, I'm letting you know, and you tell me whether I can be there or not.
Either he's a master manipulator, or he's someone who's really processed this a lot and understands the ramifications of his actions.
Correct, and that's what I'm saying. And yes, there are people that manipulate like that. So I didn't just take that at face like, haha, yay. But because of that, the leadership, we've been able to sit down and make very clear guidelines, and it's a one strike you're out policy, not three.
Yep.
And so we've said, okay, there's going to be these limited interactions, and if you cross this line once for the safety of everybody, you're gone.
Yep. And let's be clear, the line is not what he did before. The line is a lot further back from what he did before. So the line isn't like...
It's been drawn in a lot more. It's correct, like if I see you handing candy to a child, I mean,
Correct. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. So it's not one strike being... one serious action taken, but more so we're seeing the little actions that could be seen as, or even
we want to prevent them from being enabled to
Correct.
go back down that path. But the point I was bringing all that up was, it's interesting this topic hit when I was having to not exactly the same, but deal with something like that. And just even in that limited interaction, whether this person, people could say, well, they're probably manipulating you or not. That level of, even if it was manipulation, dealing with it is a far cry from what so far in evidence has been seen or is known by me in the Duggar case. And that automatically threw another red flag up. I'm like, where is the contrition? Where is the, this is wrong? Where is the, what, so that was my initial thoughts. Like, there's just nothing about this case that strikes me as good.
No,
I mean, not
at all.
that there was any fear about that before, but there was not even a modicum of like, I don't even think this person understands problem. And that scares me even further. And I guess that was my final thought. I'm terrified for his children. If something hasn't already happened to them, I'm very terrified for his kids during this time. Because I hate to say my brain goes that way, but if this guy knows he's about to go to jail for a long time, and if you've ever done prison ministry, jails have a hierarchy. I know this might shock some people. It's kind of off topic, but prisons have a hierarchy. Prisoners have a way of what they think is acceptable evils in public and not. And depending on what you go to jail for, there's levels. And anything that deals with molesting kids or child pornography, like stuff that deals with little infants, like even gang members and hardened criminals, they do not, that's like the bottom rung of prison slime. And a lot of people that go to jail over these kinds of things end up never coming out of jail, not because they're staying there for a sentence, because they get killed. Other prisoners just kind of whack them. And so my fear is, if the guy knows he's going to jail for a while, and that could probably happen, assuming the guy's got two brain cells firing at the same time, what does he try and enjoy before he goes? And that terrifies me.
Well, and by the way, there's a political system within prisons too, and just that whole thing made me think of an amazing podcast by Propaganda. If you don't know who Propaganda is, Christian hip hop and spoken word artist who is really involved in social activism and social justice. But he has a podcast called Hood Politics, and the entire idea, he's from Southern California, and his entire thing is that you can describe all of like American politics and geopolitical issues through the lens of politics in the hood. And and how gangs interact and all like the whole thing. And it's really, really insightful, and it's delivered in a very authentic way as well. And I would just recommend that to anyone who's curious, and if that enticed you at all, you should definitely check it out. But so, Henry, I don't differ from you in how you feel about it. I differ in the significant, or not the significance, but the blatantness of my reaction, I guess, or the expression that I've had, which is basically because of my work with absurdity and diving into a lot of this stuff over the years, as far as like stories after story after story. I'm subscribed to the subreddit Pastor Arrested, which is just highlighting
I'm
once
sure
again
a wonderful
all
Reddit thread.
those. Yeah, well, unfortunately, Henry, I found out about that subreddit and had Googled. It was shortly after a friend of ours got caught up in something, who's a pastor, and yes,
Yes.
he absolutely appeared on that subreddit, which was a really bad day for me but that's how I found that subreddit. So the I've been exposed to so much of this stuff, as far as like all these different stories and of this happening, that it's kind of like, great, another one. Now, granted, this is a different level too.
This
in
is gross
some
enough
in
that the
some
dopamine hit
respects,
to get rid of
but
the desensitizing nature.
but it's still like, I wouldn't say dopamine. There's definitely not dopamine from this.
well, I meant, oh, that's true. Yeah, I just mean
Yeah,
the desensitization process. Things have to get
there was
more.
it was shocking enough to
Yeah.
jolt, yes, but I still had more of a like, yes, this is disgusting, but at this point, it almost seems par for the course for a lot of people like this, and that's what scares me about it, and I think that's the thing that gets me the most is the scariness of, when does it stop, if it ever stops, or what can we do systemically or individually to help deal with some of this and protect people, but both protect people from ever falling into the trap of doing this kind of thing, but also protect others from those who do fall into those traps or willingly enter them. And then the other side of this was just frustration and anger, because every single time, and I've talked about this several times on the show, but every single time something like this happens, it makes a pastor's job harder. It makes it harder for Christianity, like for real and true and genuine, authentic Christianity to shine
exist.
and to exist.
Yeah.
Correct. And every time this is what we're seeing with a lot of white evangelicalism that sold its soul to Trump, was that same thing. By the way, I'm not saying every single Trump supporter is this. I'm talking about evangelicalism as a system, just so we're all clear on this.
The leadership as a whole of like the Christian Coalition and things like this. We're not talking about necessarily the individual voter.
Yes, though there are a lot of individual voters as well, but not all. I'm not going to sit here and go all Trump supporters or whatever. We're not doing that here, but I just wanted to make that clear. It's just, it delegitimizes what we're trying to do. And well, nothing can delegitimize it, but what I'm saying is it just makes those conversations harder. And I remember I was just watching, I found an old Joe Rogan Experience clip of Neil deGrasse Tyson on why he doesn't call himself an atheist. And his entire shtick was, I don't call myself an atheist because I believe in the definition of the word being defined by, or being made by, how it's currently being used. So his idea was, I don't call myself atheist because of the behavior and actions of the top atheists, or the most public and notable atheists.
What people think of when they say that.
Yes, who you think of when you say that. He's like, I don't back what they're doing. I don't do what they do, and I don't care about that. And I don't but atheism is now defined by a lot of those individuals and that kind of militant version of atheism. And he's like, I don't put myself in that boat. And so I have trouble calling myself an atheist. And he also doesn't like divorce himself from religious language. He has no problem saying, Godspeed, or, saying anything like that as far as that may reference God or may positively reference God or religion. He doesn't really have a problem with that. And man, is that so tempting of a position to take within Christianity.
Sometimes with Christianity, yeah, there's that's been a thing I've wrestled with for the last couple of years specifically, the idea of, do I even want to call myself Christian anymore? Not that I don't believe in the Christ, the anointed one, in the form of the Greek definition of it, the Messiah of Jesus. But that term, especially in the West, is becoming so loaded. And it's almost to the point you're like, am I playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded, cylinder at this point? It's like,
and that's what's so hard about this is the only reason, and I came to this conclusion a long time ago too, but the only reason that I'm still in this faith and still a part of this community within Christianity and within my own, denomination within that is because I genuinely believe what I believe. And that's basically it. Yes, there's a little bit of comfort in, it being your kind of, as Rachel Held Evans used to say, kind of her first language, right? It's something that it does feel like home when you've been in it for long enough. But at the end of the day, the only reason I'm still here is because I genuinely believe in the belief system, not necessarily the organization itself. And while I do believe the organization and the institution of the church and different denominations within Christianity can do a lot of good, at the same time, I am not here because of people. And that's the ultimate, like, that's why I'm still here. And it's just frustrating because it means that there's a whole lot of mess to clean up too. There was actually, on that note, there's this old sermon I heard from a pastor in Las Vegas, Judd Wilhite, who he was pastoring a megachurch. I don't know if he's still there. This was like 2012 or 2013. And he was preaching on what it's like to essentially be in a megachurch in Las Vegas and what it looks like to minister in essentially Sin City. And he's like, yeah, people show up for the first time completely hungover or still strung out and having lost everything in gambling or, whatever they've done, cheated on their spouse, could be anything, right? And he told the story of, I don't even remember the whole sermon. I just remember this one bit where he told the story of a guy who came in drunk. It's 9 a.m. on a Sunday. He came in completely drunk, and at one point the guy threw up and passed out and fell into his own vomit. And no one judged the guy around him, but instead, like, kind of maintenance crew came in and people, I think they called an ambulance and they got him taken care of essentially and got him cleaned up, and they cleaned up the mess and kept going. And his whole thing, his whole one-liner in that whole sermon was basically, sin is messy, grab a mop. And the idea that you can be a part of helping to clean up the mess, and when someone else is caught up in their own mess, the best thing you can do is grab a mop and get in there and help them clean up and get out of it. Now, if someone doesn't want out of the mess, that's a different thing, right? That's completely.
Or if somebody doesn't want a mop, they want a get out of jail free card.
Yep.
Like this case.
Yep. There's actually, man, I keep talking, but this just reminded me of something I learned in lifeguarding. But in lifeguarding, when someone is drowning, you're trained as a lifeguard to never actually go, maybe this has changed in the last decade, but you're never actually supposed to like go out to them, especially without a flotation.
Correct, because they'll try and drown you.
Yeah,
because they will be so desperate.
It's the lily pad effect, but the idea is that when they're flailing, they're reaching for anything they possibly can, and so they will push down on it to get themselves up, and so they will drown you. So the idea is you reach out with your I forget what it's called, but basically that red
big
buoy.
Long board thing that they throw out. Yeah.
So you're supposed. The idea is you give that to them so that they can float, and then once they, as they're calming down and as they stop flailing, because now you can pull them in. But the idea is you never actually go out and grab them yourself until they've stopped flailing. that's the because otherwise it's you or them at that point. And you're going to lose that battle in that moment if they get on you first. So there's one of those things.
Yeah.
So there is.
So I guess we have to face this again, right? We have to go back to the topic.
So yep. Though there was some good stuff there.
Oh no, it was, but.
So let's get into this Twitter thread from Rachel Den Hollander, who is one of the people that was key in taking down Larry Nassar, who was the U.S. Olympic coach for gymnasts who's prosecuted and convicted, back in 2016? 2015?
Something like that, or
somewhere around the same time as, yeah. But yeah, so let's get into this thread a bit. And yeah, Henry, if you want to take us through that and what and introduce that.
Oh, mercy. So now I need to pull the thread up. Because you were like, I'm not going to pull that. I have that thread up for you. And I said, okay, fine.
Well,
so
I'm upset too because I had it up and it disappeared. I don't know where it went in my notes.
Oh, that's
but
why
it's
you
gone.
wanted that.
Yep, I was asking you to save my skin there.
Okay, well, I've got it up now. So if I beat you to finding it again.
Oh yeah, you have it. You're good. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I do. So how do we want to go through this? Let's see here. We don't want to read this entire thing because that's a lot, but we want to try and hit some of the highlights here. So let's just go through some of the points that she brings up and then talk about it. Because I remember we chose to go all transparency here. We chose to talk about this topic after reading through this thread. This thread was brought to both our attention, and by the time we finished reading this, we were just like, okay, yeah. So
yeah, shout out to Matthew Schallenberger for bringing it to our attention.
Yes, because I'm not on Twitter a lot, and so I probably would have definitely missed this. I think we've talked about her first tweet kind of already, but just for the sake of clearly stating this, if you didn't figure that out by our revulsion earlier, she said the images and videos Josh downloaded for his own sexual pleasure were of toddlers and babies being sexually assaulted, 18 months to 3 years old. He literally found sexual gratification in watching the sexual torture of babies and toddlers.
Mm-hmm.
So if that was the whole point we were talking about earlier, I think we've kind of dealt with this. This is just revolting. And we talked about the FBI agent. She brings that up. Okay, this part is interesting. We should bring this one up. So she goes on a couple down the thread. She goes, he was able to view these images even though he had a program like Covenant Eyes on his computer because he downloaded special software that allowed him to bypass it. And his reports were going to his wife, the homeschooling mom of 6 with the 7th on the way. Busy and exhausted, and also expected to babysit her husband's porn problem. Let's just pause on that for a minute.
Yeah. I will be 100% transparent and say this has and will always be one of my biggest personal struggles. And I don't mean what he was looking at. I mean the workarounds. Growing up, my dad was very into computers. I built my own computer at a very young age. I was involved in IT when I worked for the IT department at my high school, to the point that when I worked for as a yearbook editor my senior year, I was given full admin privileges over the computers in that room, over all of our yearbook computers, and set up a server for us and everything. Now, it's been years since I've done that, so I had to figure it out that year, and it's been a while, so I haven't done that since. But basically, the idea is I know my way around devices. And it's increasingly true that future generations from now will also know their way around devices. And I know enough to be dangerous, which means that all of those apps that people have, Covenant Eyes, which I think was done by Triple X Church, unless Covenant Eyes is a separate thing, because Triple X Church also had
They might have spun it off, but
they had a different one too.
Basically, they're programs that are supposed to filter your access to
firewalls.
pornography.
And they send reports to trusted individuals
whoever you select.
so that there's accountability. Yep. And if you know the workarounds, which on a phone, on a computer, you name it, like they're not hard. But I'm also not going to say any of them specifically on here because I don't want to give that avenue to anyone who might be struggling with the same. All I can say is what it did was instead of putting myself in a position where I didn't have the only way to not have access is to basically take away internet completely. And battling temptation in my own life at the end of the day often comes down to a one-on-one willpower and losing that willpower battle every time sort of deal. That's what my life always had been with this. So it is when you know those tools And when you know those ways of doing things, it makes that battle exponentially harder. And that is not meant to humanize or anything more than what it is. I'm just stating that those workarounds exist, and it does suck when you're in the position of knowing them and dealing with a problem.
Yeah. I mean, I'm more concerned, even independent of workarounds. The thing that disturbs me about that is thinking about that's true how these programs work or whatever. Why do you further violate your wife by making her the one responsible to police your porn problem?
Oh, yeah. No, yes, correct.
Which is kind of what the thread brought up, right? She's like,
Yes.
oh, yeah, so his wife, who already knew he had one, and is now, quote, the trusted individual with it, and even more kids on the way, is responsible for policing whether those reports are accurate or whether he's working around it or whether, I mean, like, really?
Yep. It's putting your wife in an unsafe position in general, and a position to hurt her every single time that you do something wrong. And every single time that you do something wrong. And now granted that can on its own be a powerful motivator too. It's often not enough of a motivator, so no one get your hopes up by that method. But it's just a way to basically guarantee that you're going to cause harm where you don't. The bottom line is, and I really want to be clear here in saying that at that point, the pornography addiction is her husband's problem. It's not her problem. It is his problem. And yes, she can play a supporting role and kind of a cheerleader and moral support role, but ultimately it is his problem, not hers, and it is not his right to make it hers.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that supporting role for a minute, because that thread did keep
goes
going
into it a little bit
that,
more. Yep.
A little into that.
See how I keep feeding you these little...
You're just helping us. Do you have the thread in front of you now again?
I do.
Is that why
I have it.
So now you know where it's coming from. Yeah. So she keeps going. We'll jump down a little bit in the thread. She says, quote, submission, in air quotes, becomes a catchphrase to protect. She certainly couldn't tell anyone because that would not be respectful. That's how we counsel wives in these marriages. But she was certainly taught to have sex more to fix it. Her own mother-in-law wrote blog articles that said as much.
Mm. The reality was and is that they come from a belief system that says, yeah, the wife is supposed to submit to the husband. The husband's word is basically law, is basically rule, to the point that when Josh got released on bail, his wife was called in and was asked for her perspective and asked for whether she felt comfortable with him being out. And she never expressed comfort with it.
Was that him, or was that the piano teacher wife of the guy that he found to put him out on bail? Because I don't think he's staying at the house. Remember, that's the third party.
Was it the third party?
I need to look down. I need to look down her thread. Isn't that further down?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Maybe it wasn't
Josh
his wife.
was arrested. Is it
her husband? Yeah, her husband made that. So it was the wife of the person that he's staying with.
Who was a piano teacher of children. So now he's staying at a third party place that also would have children coming into it.
And so it was it was the witness's husband that made the decision, and she was here to support him. That's what it was. It was when she was called to the witness.
Here's the quote.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, I'd read it.
Here's the quote. She says, every single family who takes piano from her and the wife herself has to uproot their routine, livelihood, and the child's music education because Josh. Everyone is expected to bear the cost except Josh.
Yep. And it is absolutely despicable that there's a theology that allows room for this kind of thing.
Yes, because here's the quote on that theology. I found it now. Sorry, we're scrolling through this thread pretty fast, not trying to give you the whole thing. Let's see. She was called to the witness stand and asked if she was in agreement with having Josh live with them. She responded that, quote, her husband had made the decision and she was here to support him, end quote. Because under that theology, he has the authority and her job is to submit.
Yep. And this is what's so despicable is all of these people. I love what you had read there. All of these people are now impacted by this. By all these children and women are put at risk because of men who believe that they have the right to decide whatever they want to decide. And literally, this is 2 tweets down or 3 tweets down, I think, from that. The men make the decisions and decide the theology. They just don't bear the cost. Whether or not the children could be abused or already have been doesn't matter. And keeping Josh in their lives pretty much guarantees they will not disclose. But anyway, God hates divorce.
She keeps going, everyone else, from Josh's own children to a woman afraid to have him in the home to his own wife, are bearing the risks and costs of this behavior, and they are being told it is godly and right to do it.
One of the questions, or one of the problems that I see people run into when they're studying the Bible and when they're coming to conclusions is a lot of people get so caught up in the plain text language that a lot of scripture tends to use, even when speaking, contextually to something, or, speaking to something very specific within culture or, the time period. People get so caught up in a lot of those verses or a lot of those things and imagery in the Bible that they go, yeah, this just makes sense. And they rationalize it within the moment. But there is not a lot of thought that goes into the actual implications of that belief. And it is often that I find perceived biblical truth is disproven through the implications of the belief rather than the biblical text itself. And what I mean by that is humans are very, very capable of interpreting things in wild ways. And it is down to that individual interpretation where you have to look at the implications of what you believe and where that actually ends up leading you and where that would lead others and how it actually impacts others. And that's where you actually may discover that your interpretation wasn't so correct to begin with. And it should at least cause you to question and revisit. Even if it ultimately doesn't mean you change your position, it should at the very least cause you to revisit, rethink, and restudy your belief when you see those implications or when you discover those implications. And this is headship theology, submission theology, all of this I think falls into that category.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not Christianity.
No, it's not. It's not a belief of Christianity, even if it comes masqueraded as one. Now,
even though it's been adopted wholesale by big chunks and swaths of the church.
And that's the problem is, at what point is it, at what point do we just say Christianity is whatever the majority of it are doing versus what
I guess that's where you have to
is.
differentiate it. Biblical or genuine Christianity versus
Correct.
Contemporary Christianity, whatever, wordplay you want to unfortunately have to use.
Yeah. And
but the point is, we're talking about this thread's brought up the Duggar situation is showing this theology in practice. If you're disgusted by why in the world is everybody flipping over backwards to make things work for this guy, and now all these other kids are at risk, and these wives and all these women that are like, this is not good, time out, and they're just like, submit, woman. This is where this is coming from.
Yep.
And it would have to be personal belief too, because I can't imagine for these women to be submitting to this. There has to be some overarching belief, fear, whatever you want to call it, in them that says, even though everything in me says, no, I'm going to do this.
Well, I encountered that in a very, very small way. And this was, I think, the first time that I really realized how ingrained some of this stuff could be. But I firmly believe there's actually a book about this called Leaders Eat Last. And the idea being that leaders make sure that everyone else gets food before they do. And I very much lived by that when I was pastoring full time, and going through our little potluck buffet line thing that we had at my tiny little church in South Carolina. I remember standing there, and all the women had left a little bit early from the service to go make sure all the food was ready, and that's just how they did things. And when they noticed me standing in the kitchen before not grabbing any food, one of the older women in the church in her 60s was basically approached me and said, "Pastor, go eat food." And I said, No, you first. I want to make sure that everyone else gets food, and I'll take whatever's left. I'll take from whatever's left. And she said, No. Yeah. I was raised that the
pastor gets it
first. The pastor
first.
goes first. And I was like, well, and I lead in a way that I want to make sure everyone else is taken care of before before I am. And I lost that battle that day. Not really a
It's funny
battle
you say that.
necessarily, but it was I didn't want to get into it. So I just I said, well, thank you. I very much appreciate your kindness. But it was culturally ingrained. She was raised that way. And now she's in her 60s. She's lived her entire life that way.
Yeah.
How do you undo that kind of cultural ingrainment? I don't know the word. I don't want to say indoctrination, but just that.
You have humorous attempts to change it. I had almost a similar situation where that was me. I did not like eating first. And the ladies, when they finally realized I wouldn't do it, since I was usually standing at the front of the church talking for a while before I walked over there, they just went and started making takeout plates for me.
Mm.
And so then I didn't know when they got the takeout plate, which they probably did at the front end. But, they were determined. Here's your food.
And I'm not saying like that's an easy way. Like that's kind of like a good problem, I guess, to have is like, oh no, you first. No, you first. Like it's a kind thing of people trying to be selfless and be generous. But it very much, if you are taught this from day one and this is ingrained in your family, this is what you saw in your parents, this is what you saw in leaders around you in your entire social circle, then why would you believe anything else? It's hard to fathom for us, but it's not so difficult to fathom for those who are in it.
Yeah, but to roam it back around to this topic, this deals with an issue of selflessness too in the church, and again, bad theology. Selfless does not mean thinking less of yourself in the sense that you're garbage. When Christians talk about selfless, right? Well, you got to be selfless. Okay, selflessness does not mean you're being treated like a garbage can or a doormat or something else. Selfless does not mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less. That's all that means. And for like these ladies involved in this and the people with this Duggar case, it's proof that they're being told your fears don't matter. Your safety doesn't matter. Your emotions do not matter. What matters is you being, quote, selfless or whatever religious language we want to use. And he is in trouble right now. And Josh needs help. And Josh needs this. And your job is to submit to that as good Christians. I'm sure some version of this. And do what it takes to rally and help this individual because they're a sinner in need right now, if they even admit that he's wrong. Yeah. Right? He's a sinner in need, and so we just need to rally together, and your reward will be in heaven or whatever triggering religious mumbo-jumbo language they're probably using. And the point is, if it is asking these people, which I think it is, to sacrifice themselves emotionally, physically, and risk their own children sexually, perchance, or everything else, that is not selfless. That is not Christian. That is a doctrine of demons.
Yep.
Okay, let's just, this is the part in the thread that bothered me beyond anything else, because, I'm with more militant atheists and everything else when people go, if the church is willing to sacrifice its children, okay, let me actually back up. I'm going to put it this way. Let me use really biblically sound language for this. When I study the First Testament, what a lot of people commonly call the Old Testament, but there's nothing old about it. When I study the First Testament, whenever, and I mean whenever Israel, the nation of Israel, got into worshiping idols, when they got into idolatry, when they left God and they were worshiping Baal, Ashtoreth, the high places, some carved tree image, this bronze serpent on the pole, whatever. Every single story, when they got headlong into worshiping some sort of idol, it always ended in the murder of children. Mm-hmm. It always ended in the murder of children. They put them in the fires to Baal, right? They sacrificed them in the high places or whatever. And to me, I've always used that illustration to say, if whatever thing you've made an idol in your life, if you've made a worship style an idol, if you've made a certain preference on something an idol, if there is an idol in your religious experience, it will always end in the murder of your children, of the next generation. It always will. Now, maybe not the physical murder. You might not literally take a knife and slice them open and throw them in a fire. But if the churches wonder why the next generation, why every generation it seems the next one's gone, are dying spiritually, or disappearing from the churches, ask yourself, is your church murdering them to maintain whatever the idol is you have, that worship style, that music style, that dress style, that theology style, that how often do you read the red book style, whatever, what do you eat? Any bad theology will always murder children. And all I can say is that all this story so far, just the details we have, and admittedly we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on a podcast about, obviously we're filtering in real time info and we're not in the exact situation. So we're dealing the best we can. But every intent and purpose seems to show that children are being sacrificed for the sake of this Josh guy. And piano student children and his own children and all these children are being sacrificed for the sake of whatever. And if that's the case, that's an automatic, huge biblical red flag that says this is complete garbage. And it is not condoned by God. It should never be condoned by the church. And anyone that supports that kind of theology doesn't need to be in church either.
Yeah. Yep.
You're getting me mad. Okay.
No, I get it. No. And we do need to bring this to a resolution. I agree with you. And I think that's a great way of putting this is look at the impacts that it has on children, on women. The Bible has over 2,100 verses talking about support for the widow, the orphan. And when it says widow, yes, I know that men can be widows too, but the Bible is very specifically talking about women in this position, right? This is a very real thing, and I think that's a very concrete metric that you can actually look at and adjust if how this actually plays out for children. And I can already think of a few other very important areas that we could use some revisiting just based off of those implications. But the question I have, Henry, at this point is, where do we go from here? What does this mean for the person listening, assuming they could even get through this podcast at this point? I will not be upset one bit if this doesn't get listened to
halfway into the beginning.
Yeah, if someone couldn't make it all the way through, I do not blame them. But yeah, where do we go from here?
I mean, first we need to, in our own mind, accept the reality, I believe, that this is unacceptable. And it needs to be clearly stated as much. I mean, you may not have to do an hour-long podcast talking about the gruesome details about this, but I mean, this could be as simple as whenever you hear someone bring up that name, or if it starts getting talked about more in society or whatever, you use any moment to be like, that is unacceptable. I mean, the first thing, you got to call it what it is. It's gross. It's unacceptable. Second of all, if you're a person of faith, now is a time to, again, it's always the saying, you can't change the past, you can only change the present or impact the present to change the future. We need to look at our own faith communities and our own ways of living and saying, what are we doing that could contribute to the small steps that lead to that or enable people like that? Or, there might not be a Josh Duggar in every congregation or in every family, but there are things you can choose to do to help prevent the Josh Duggars of the world from ending up in your family or in your congregation, or to stop them before there's even more bodies stacked up in their victim column.
Yep.
Right. I mean, this is a big thing, and I appreciate that our denomination, I know, has been making a big push for this in the last several years. It was first Verified Volunteers, then it was Sterling Volunteers, or they keep renaming it because whatever company they're paying to do this. But there's one reason why, if you're in a small church, or even if you're not part of our denomination, you're in a church, make every single one of your children's workers go through some sort of background check and training for child abuse and things like that. And don't let them work with kids if they don't. I don't care if they're the 80-year-old woman that's always been faithful and ran a Sunday school or Sabbath school for 500 years. And you're like, well, she wouldn't hurt a fly. She has 200 cats. I don't care. Whatever the cliche, make everybody go through it. I literally, at our church, we had this happen when we were changing over to children's church. And I had a woman that had been running Sabbath school for probably 60 years. She didn't even have an email. Okay. She's like tech illiterate. Okay. I had to take time, and a couple other deacons, and sit down and help make her an email so that she could sign up to go through this online training. We had to spend a lot of annoying hours on the phone explaining to her, okay, see the big green button, click that. Now watch this video. Well, how do they do the background check? Did they check my email address? Is that, no, you have to put your social security. We had to walk through. It was annoying to get her through this thing. Okay, but we held the line, no exceptions. Everybody got this test. Everybody went through it. It can make structural changes to your facilities. There should never be a single classroom that a kid is in that's not a window in the door. Period. There should be no closed doors with young people. Just nope. And if your church doesn't have the money to put windows in or whatever else, take the door off the hinge. I don't care. Do not. Get creative. The point is, stop making excuses in our own lives. Okay? It's because excuses, let's just use Josh Duggar again. We got here because excuses were made for him for years. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. What you enable today will kill you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how small it is, right? We have to stand up and say it's not acceptable, but then we have to act on it. Okay. And yeah, we're not the jury and we can't sit on the Duggar case, but we can sit in our own families and our own communities and say, this is unacceptable. We need to deal with this. And then finally start, like we said before, examining the theologies and the methodologies that you hold now. And ask yourself, what are they doing to young people? In this case, we could ask also, what are they doing to women? That's almost a related but side topic. I could say that injustice towards women is the oldest sin in the Bible. I mean, the very first person that sin threw under the bus was a woman. I don't know if you realize that when God showed up and said, Adam, where are you? And he goes, oh, yeah, well, the woman you gave me, first thing sin did, woman got thrown under the bus. Okay. And the very first warning God gave, I know there's some debate theologically, like, well, God cursed women for, no, read it carefully. He goes, her desire will be for her husband, but he will rule over her. And I view that as less prescriptive than descriptive.
Correct.
You can feel free to disagree with me.
No.
But I really don't think I really don't think that's God saying, now woman shall serve man. Okay.
Because that was never his intent. Just an outcome or a result of this, but not a God ordained outcome or result of this.
Right, because think about this. If you've moved into a sin environment, I know you were using religiously charged language, but very brief. The idea that now it's me, I, selfishness is taken over. We have to take care of ourselves. Well, 9 out of 8 times it's might makes right. And I know that, and there's nothing against women as a gender. I'm not meaning it this way, but as a whole, I know there are exceptions to this. As a whole, if you had a man and a woman have to go physically head to head over something, who is usually the stronger physically? It's nothing against women, and I've seen women bodybuilders and stuff, and they could break me in half with their pinkies. But my point is, the majority of the time, men have more physical brute strength. And because of that, if you are now living in a society where might makes right, then who's probably going to be on the losing end of most of these arguments?
Yep.
Yeah, women, right? And so men have ruled over. Injustice against women is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, sin in the book in human history, and injustice. But that's a different topic. But bring it to a close here. I want to turn it to you, Ryan, because I'm just getting wound up and go. Is again, ask yourself, what are you holding now? What is your belief system? What are your methodologies? What are they saying about women? What are they saying about children? And more importantly, I guess, to this topic, what are they saying about perpetrators in sin? Okay. And I'm all for grace. And I believe if everybody's alive, there's hope. Okay. But any theology or any use of grace that prioritizes grace to the victimizer over grace to the victim is out of balance, out of whack, and out of the Bible.
Yep. I agree.
So you need to readdress it.
By the way, on the point of men being physically stronger, just by physiologically, there was actually a story of Serena Williams, who is like the greatest women's tennis player ever, and is an absolute unit of a person. There's a story of her saying that she could beat anyone in the top ranked 200 men in the world in tennis. And some Russian player, I forget his name, this was years and years ago, but there was some Russian player who essentially, who was ranked 212 and accepted that challenge. And he beat her, I think it was 5, they played one set, he beat her 5-1. And when asked about the game and about his day prior, he had smoked a cigar or two before the game and had had some whiskey as well. I just insane, and like that's against Serena Williams, who's like one of the greatest players.
Like
You can look
beast,
up John Eisner, who is he's known for having one of the most powerful serves in tennis, and just look up any of like Josh's mixed or John I think it's John Eisner, any of his mixed doubles where he serves against the women, and it's like just everyone's laughing because the women literally can't touch those serves.
And we're not trying to make any statement like that women are weak or pathetic.
Correct. Like, these are all incredibly talented. Yeah, like there's no, there's like these are all
goat like greatest of all time,
women.
not like But
so just to give a point to that, I hope that lends some credence to what you're sharing here, because it's very much true, whether we like it or not. And And I think for us as individuals, I do think that we need to do some work on our own beliefs and see how the implications of those beliefs actually do impact others. And I think we need to be willing to have those conversations in our churches, in our small groups. If you're a pastor, youth pastor, having those conversations amongst amongst your own youth and amongst your own church members and families, and going into there needs to be, in the same way that there were classes for women on and all these different times set aside for women to be taught how to basically make sure that they don't tempt a man and how they're supposed to live appropriately and act appropriately.
This is purity culture again.
Yep.
We could just keep going.
I know
on
it,
that.
but it comes back to that, right? The thing for me is there needs to be intentional work done to value young women, to show them that they matter, to show them that they are not responsible for the actions that men and that boys and teenagers decide to take. That they are fully independent, that they are fully valued equally in the eyes of God, and that they have value, dignity, worth, everything. There needs to be that same kind of emphasis now on the flip side to make sure that they know that, and so that we can begin to end that stupid chain. I hate it. And I hate the number of women that I have met in my own life, the number of women that I'm close to, who are a victim of those kinds of teachings. And to be honest with you, there's not that many that aren't in some way, shape, or form.
I mean, if you want to know one reason I get so passionate, my own wife, even in the time we've been married, has been the victim of people sexually harassing her, looking down on her or whatever. And I've had to watch and this gets at you as a man who has to, like, I'm supposed to protect my wife or whatever, like that. And to watch her willingly tell me, just leave it alone and don't do anything. And because she just doesn't feel like there's any worth in her going through the effort of addressing it, it just gets my last crawl.
Yep.
I mean, it's a spiritual challenge for me not to literally be unchristian in my thoughts towards certain people in her life right now, in her workplace and all that are doing things to her that I just want to go out and like wring their neck, literally, which isn't healthy. But it's a human problem, but sadly it's a church problem, and we need to own it. If you've never heard it before, this is a church problem.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of work to do. So with that, Henry and I need to go wash our mouths out and go take a shower, and obviously separately.
Yeah.
And we just need to try and move on with our day after this conversation. If you've made it to this point, thank you so much, and we hope this was at least beneficial to you and gave you some things to ponder and think about. And kudos to you if you're already in the position that we've talked about of being someone on the good side of this fight, who is teaching value to people and is showing them that they are worthy of love and care, and that they are equal in the eyes of God. If you're on that journey right now, then we applaud you for doing that for others and for making sure to communicate that. And if you're on the journey of realizing that for yourself, then let Henry and I be two more voices in your life that are telling you that yes, you absolutely are valuable, you are worthy. And just to be clear, one thing that Rachel said in her thread was that porn is the gateway to things that Josh has found himself in. And while that can be true, just because you may have an addiction or a really bad habit with this stuff does not make you Josh Duggar. No. So
your decisions make you who you are.
Correct. Your decisions.
Make better ones.
Yeah, make better ones. And I'm not saying that you're staring at the edge of a cliff and you're just one, bad decision away from being this. You're actually several bad decisions from being from this. It's tiny decisions after tiny decisions, but just know that there is hope for you, that there is a way out of this. And if you want to reach out and talk with either of us, contact info, social media is all in the show notes. So you're welcome to reach out to us, and we're happy to connect you with support resources in any way that we can also support you, though limited with just the two of us. So that's why we're going to try and connect you as much as possible and help you. But you're always welcome to reach out to us. Confidentiality is always important to us as well, and that matters. So thank you, everyone, for listening, for supporting the show. Share it with a friend. If you haven't yet, that's how podcasts grow, is word of mouth. And
maybe this is not the first episode to share with
correct. Them. Share literally any other episode. That would mean the world to us. So with that, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.